and then you ought to be able to use your arrow keys or whatever.
There we go. Shockingly, it works. Okay. Our topic tonight is the waters of Tennessee and how your voice protects them. I'm going to further welcome and introduce our distinguished panelists tonight, Dr. Chris Groves of Western Kentucky University and Dr. Brian Waldron of the University of Memphis. And we had at least one distinguished guest. They're all distinguished. Register. Hopefully he's on tonight. Commissioner David Salyers of the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. So we're looking forward to some lively discussion later.
Jim, I am on. So
all right.
Thanks for the invitation. Yes, I'm very excited about the talks tonight.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Commissioner. We're apparently having record attendance tonight. Who knew that water policy could be such a draw? Maybe we should call somebody in Hollywood and suggest, instead of the obligatory, introductory murder in a police procedural, they start with water policy topic or something. Anyway, before we get to that, I get to talk about one of our favorite topics, and that's ourselves. This is kind of like being at the wanting to watch a YouTube video and you're just wondering where the skip the ad button is. Well, I got the button tonight, so my apologies to all. Harpeth Conservancy, we've been around for 20 years now, and our vision is clean water and healthy ecosystems for rivers championed by the people who live here. We have 4 major program areas, as you can see here on the next slide. Water quality protection, rural land use, river science and wildlife, and restoration and monitoring, which Ryan runs, and community engagement and leadership building, which we hope we all do. We have a number of activities coming up I want to make sure you're aware of. One of our set of recurring activities is our Lessons of the River. That's where we actually get out and do hands-on training and education and restoration. And it's great fun, and we encourage everybody to look us up and sign up for those. And then monthly, we do a conservation conversation, and we try to pick something topical and bring distinguished experts to talk about them. And tonight, obviously, is our topic, Waters of Tennessee. Next month, we'll be talking about women in environmental science, and in April, invasive versus native species. We want to, obviously, we do this so that we can get you involved in all aspects of protecting our waterways. And here are a number of ways that you can help. Everything from getting out there, getting your hands dirty, to getting into the legislature. I'm not sure, wonder how much difference there is. No, never mind. And of course, one of the ways you can help us do all this is with a Harpeth Conservancy license plate. So true commercial. So please do help us out whenever you can. Our panel tonight is very distinguished, other than yours truly. Chris Groves is the University Distinguished Professor of Hydrogeology and Director of the Crawford Hydrology Lab at Western Kentucky University. And Brian Waldron is the, if I can actually see the slide here, I'll read the, I'll read this here, Brian. It's my apologies, it covers it up. Brian is the director of the Center for Applied Earth Science and Engineering, the CAESER Institute, and associate professor of civil engineering at the University of Memphis. I want to talk about three legislative issues that are of interest and possibly facing us this year. And we want to talk about the waters of the United States and where that stands and how that relates to what we're doing here in Tennessee. And then we want to talk about some legislation proposed on alternative sewer issues and mitigation. I'd like to start with the waters of the United States. A little bit of history here for folks. In 2015, as you may know, known as the Clean Water Rule, otherwise known as the Waters of the United States Rule. It was fairly controversial, particularly among agricultural and home building interests. It immediately drew some litigation and was tied up in the courts for quite some time. In 2020, the Trump administration finally, after long notice and comment periods, substantially pulled back on that rule and promulgated something known as the Navigable Waters Protection Rule. Right now, this is really a case of who knows what's going to happen in the with the change of administration and the potentially the pendulum swinging back. It's probably time to think about what might happen and what the rule should be. All lawyers like to think about not only what the rule is, but what the rule should be, what the policy should be. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit tonight. If there's maybe there's a lesson learned here. When it comes to such silly things as hats, I think we've all learned that one size doesn't necessarily fit all. In fact, now the rubric is one size fits most. So who knows? Maybe we're having confronting the same thing with water policy here and these definitions. The Navigable Waters Protection Rule that was promulgated by the Trump administration in 2020 makes a number of changes from the Obama rule, and it narrows down to 4 main areas where the 4 main waters that are entitled to protection, and it does have some potentially problematic issues for us here in Tennessee. Tributaries are supposedly protected, and they can be perennial or intermittent, but they have to. There's some fairly technical definitions about what contributes to surface flow in a typical year that mean that we have some. It's not clear where the lines are drawn, and there are substantial concerns about where our wetlands in Tennessee stand and how we protect those in particular. The things that are so-called isolated wetlands might not be so isolated, so we rather than just trust somebody else's definition, we thought that we should actually kind of test those definitions, and since we're since Harpeth Conservancy is a science-based organization, the best way we know to do that is to invite the leading experts here to talk to us about how Tennessee's hydrogeology, its water features, are unique. So with that, I am going to quickly, because I want most of this program to be Dr. Groves and Dr. Waldron's presentations on the various water features of Tennessee, to take over here and spend most of the hour talking with them. Chris Groves is going to talk to us about Tennessee's karst geology and hydrogeology, which predominates in the eastern 2/3 of the state, and Dr. Waldron is going to talk to us about the unique hydrological features of West Tennessee, including the Memphis Sand Aquifer. So, Chris, I am going to turn the program over to you and let you talk about karst and why that's important and what the issues are in protecting it. So,
great. Can I go ahead and share my screen?
please take over and let me see how I get out of stop sharing.
Let's see. Can you see my PowerPoint?
There we go. I can see it.
Okay. All righty. Well, I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here. Talking about one of the only things that I like better than talking about caves in Tennessee is talking about caves in Kentucky. So, but I'm definitely very pleased to be here. I want to acknowledge a couple people before I get started, and that is two real kind of mentors that I've had with regard to karst in Tennessee, and above all, Nick Crawford. Some of you may have worked with Nick. He directed the Center for Cave and Karst Studies, which he started the karst program at WKU back in 1979. I ended up coming down as a college student, just attracted, to come to Kentucky and study karst with Nick in 1981. That fall in 1981, as I started going to WKU, I met my fellow geology major, John Hoffelt, who's still around and works for TDEC. John and I became friends, and he said, well, why don't you come down and go caving down in Tennessee? That was in 1981, and however many years later that is, here I am, just thrilled to be talking about this, and I appreciate both of them very much. Let's see how I go on here. And I'll also acknowledge a number of just wonderful cave photographers in Tennessee is blessed to have, whose slides I've kind of cobbled together with permission. And first of all, Alan Kressler with the U.S. Geological Survey has been very generous. Let's see. There we go. So the first thing is, what are karst landscapes? And these are places where primarily on limestone bedrock, but certain types of bedrock are especially soluble. And in these places where you have not just the type of rock, but certain, various kind of elements conspire together. And I won't go into too many details. But in these areas, dissolution is the thing, dissolving of the bedrock. And what we can say is that this dissolution of the bedrock is a dominant agent forming the landscape. I'll talk about this is a prominent spring in Tennessee, I think in Cumberland County, called Head of Sequatchie Spring. It doesn't look like much, but surprisingly, it drains the largest sinkhole in North America. So I'll come back to that. And this is just one of Tennessee's just treasures in the karst landscape. Okay, so Tennessee has more than 10,000 caves. There's a very active cave survey, the Tennessee Cave Survey, totally a volunteer organization. These are cavers that just love to go on the weekends. They have day jobs and map caves and kind of get together and have meetings and keep the the data together and make it available for for projects, for research and things like that. So I also want to acknowledge Chuck Sutherland, very a prominent member of the TCS, the Tennessee Cave Survey, for many years. And so the first thing is kind of where is karst in Tennessee? So there's more than 10,000 caves. That's more than any other state in the country. And remarkably, even though Tennessee is only 2% of the number of states in the country, there's actually 20% of the caves are here. Caves in Tennessee are designated as at least 50 feet long, or I think a minimum depth of 30 feet. So it doesn't include the smaller holes. But we see them across, as Jim said, sort of central and eastern Tennessee. We have the Western Highland Rim, essentially large, kind of big sinkhole area. I think these up here, these are probably some that have sort of drained down from Kentucky, but we'll count them. We have them in the Central Basin, sometimes called the Nashville Basin. The best caves and the most caves are on the Cumberland Plateau Escarpment. If I were to think about this as a geomorphology class, I would spend an hour talking about how the Cumberland Plateau Escarpment is, among other places, almost a perfect storm of conditions for karst development. Not much on the Cumberland Plateau because it's covered by sandstone, except for the largest cave, the largest sinkhole in North America over here. And then lots and tons of caves over in the Valley and Ridge and sinkholes. And then also over in the Smokies, there's some sort of patches of soluble rock over there. So across central and eastern Tennessee. So, and I thought through of, some sort of interesting examples of some karst areas, some of the different regions of the state. And I just picked these out kind of at random, but I can start with, let's see, I can advance here. There we go. So if I start with the Central Basin, so these are, for those of you that are geologists, these are Ordovician rocks. These are kind of the lowest, among the oldest rocks in Tennessee. This is the Carter's limestone. There's several great cave forming limestones in the Central Basin, and the Carter's is one of them. I'll talk about a little bit about this later on, but a nice example of a Central Basin cave is Gallatin Steam Plant Cave. As the name implies, it's in over in the Gallatin area. It's not actually underneath of the TVA coal plant there, but it's directly across the river and certainly in the shadow of the stacks over there. So if we go east a little bit, then here's the what's called the Highland Rim Escarpment. We have the Highland Rim is this Mississippian relatively flat-lying limestones that forms this kind of plateau, and then this Central Basin or the Nashville Basin kind of drops off in a bowl-shaped depression, and the edges. Escarpments, the edges of plateaus are great places to form karst. And so here we have Jack Daniels Cave, or the cave where Jack Daniels spring is. The best caves, as I said, are on the Cumberland Plateau Escarpment, the longest caves, the biggest caves in Tennessee. And in the Cumberland Caverns has as some of you may have been, has bluegrass shows. It's not the only one. Roy Acuff's Dunbar Cave over in Clarksville, Tennessee, for many years there was actually a radio show from there. And in fact, if you kind of walk around Nashville Airport, there's the Hatch show prints, and there's a big Roy Acuff's Dunbar Cave poster there at the airport. So, and I've mentioned over in the Cumberland Plateau, this is a map, GIS map of chocks. This is Grassy Cove, which is the largest sinkhole in North America, and it's about just the sinkhole itself is something like 5 square miles. The depression, the area that it drains is something almost 15 square miles. It's completely drained from karst. There's a stream that flows across the bottom of it that disappears into a cave called Mill Cave, comes out at the spring that I showed earlier. And I want to acknowledge Ben Miller and Brian Ham, whose photos I borrowed from there, also doing great work in Kentucky or Tennessee. And so this water starts in Grassy Cove, goes underneath of Brady Mountain, comes out at Sequatchie Springs, and then forms the Sequatchie Valley, which kind of cuts across down across the rest of the state. And then an oddball I kind of threw in there, a place I worked back in the 90s. Some of you know Sid Jones. He and I kind of worked together over here. And this is at Oak Ridge. This is the K25 gaseous diffusion plant. And it doesn't look like karst. And the reason it doesn't, this is in the Valley and Ridge, and this is developed on very well developed karst limestones. The reason it doesn't is because the Defense Department was scrambling to find a secret place to do nuclear weapons research to end the First World War. So among other kind of drastic measures, they took a sinkhole plain on kind of Paleozoic rocks over in eastern Tennessee. They filled all the sinkholes in and made it flat, and they built a 44-acre uranium diffusion plant on top of that. And the rest is history, and not all of it's good. And I won't get into the groundwater tracing using technetium-99, but it's quite a story. But an interesting karst area over there. The caves in Tennessee, not only are there a lot of them, but there's some really, really good ones. I acknowledged John Hoffeld a little bit ago, and I want to just give just a tiny anecdote of my first trip to Camp Gulf Cave, which is down in Van Buren County. I want to acknowledge Tim Curtis, who kindly let me use this photograph. This is called Echo Hall, and is you can't even get a sense from the photograph of how big it is. This is really one of the largest cave rooms, certainly in the eastern U.S. and in the U.S. It's not the biggest one in the cave. There's actually, the further back you go, the bigger they get. So this is actually, Tim told me this was a 3-day photo shoot to get this picture. But I met John at WKU in the fall of '81. We started caving together in Tennessee. And one weekend, one of the very first times I was ever caving in Tennessee, we went down there and we had a great trip and got back to his house in Nashville on Sunday evening. His mother said, "Oh, such and such called, and they're really excited. They want you to give them a call." And one of John's friends. And so John did. And it turned out that they had gone through and made an incredible breakthrough in Camp Gulf Cave that people had been trying for decades. There's a place that was obvious that there was, for various reasons, big caves on the other side of this blockage. And John's friends had finally got through and found just over Saturday and Sunday 3 of the largest rooms in the United States. So this is where Nick Crawford had done a lot of his PhD work. And so John called Nick. Nick had a meeting on Monday and couldn't skip school, but the 3 of us skipped school on Tuesday and were among the first dozen or so people into these huge rooms. Life-changing for me. So I want to focus on water, but I just can't help that Tennessee's caves are just such an incredible treasure house. These are minerals, and another Alan Kressler picture. This is over in Knox County. Archaeology. This is really some of the most ancient deep cave exploration anywhere in North America. This is in cave in Fentress County. These are 4,500-year-old footprints in mud. This is 2 hours walk from the entrance. So just incredible exploration, and just how fragile is this preservation. There's history. This is saltpeter. There was lots of mining of this mineral that people could use to produce gunpowder in the War of 1812, and then later on in the Civil War. This is in Putnam County. And then, of course, water resources. I don't know the percentage of land that's karst in Tennessee. I kind of throw out 10%, but certainly karst water resources are very, very, very important in Tennessee. And really, what's maybe the most important thing for us to understand, in this context, is that although there's a lot of people that have this idea that limestone springs are like naturally, pure and good and clean, it's exactly the opposite. I think that actually comes from Jack Daniels' ads that talk about the cave spring and how great the water is. The water is great for making whiskey, okay, and that's because the chemistry is such it has high pH. Iron has very low solubility, and iron's apparently not good for whiskey. However, in general, the karst water is invariably contaminated, including with bacteria, including the Jack Daniels cave. They use it to make the whiskey because they boil it. They don't use the cave water to later on to bring it up to use the cold water. They use city water for that. So anyway, very, very vulnerable to contamination. These people here are not contaminating the aquifer. These are my colleagues, Lynn Bledsoe and Autumn Singer from the Crawford Institute. They're actually doing dye tracing. They're using fluorescent dyes to investigate the pathway of underground rivers. This is from an underground storage tank, or tanks, plural, I should say, investigation in Sumner County. And I'll kind of wrap up. There's any number of examples of the idea of contamination in karst, but there's one I worked on in Tennessee that I want to really kind of focus on a little bit. It's very closely tied to this idea of the sort of waters of the U.S. and waters of Tennessee, underground connectivity. And I'm not an environmental lawyer, but some of you know about the Maui decision recently, and sort of these connectivity issues. Well, this is a poster child for some of that stuff. So this is the Gallatin steam plant in Sumner County, upstream from Nashville. And I want to acknowledge my involvement here was actually through a lawsuit from the Tennessee Clean Waters Network and the Tennessee Scenic Rivers Association, working with the Southern Environmental Law Center. And really want to acknowledge wonderful colleagues, Amanda Garcia, Beth Alexander, and Ann Pacino. And then some great work by Britton Dotson at TDEC in this case. And it was just my pleasure to work with these people. So anyway, so the Cumberland River is going through here. And in one area over here, which is called the Ash Pond Complex, they had, TVA had pumped, starting in 1970, something like around 12 million cubic yards of coal ash slurry into this valley over at what's now the Ash Pond Complex here circled. Okay. Well, it turns out that this is a map prior to the plan, in fact, prior to Old Hickory Lake being dammed up. And this is the same area. This is the Ash Pond Complex, but it's a place called Sinking Creek. If this was my hydrology class, I would ask, why would a place be called Sinking Creek in a karst landscape? Okay. Well, that's because the karst landscapes are like Swiss cheese. They have these caves, water just doesn't stay on the surface. And Sinking Creek, Lost Cove, these are common names because surface streams go along and they sink underground into the karst system. The question for the final would be, if you're ever in charge of finding a place to put 12 million cubic yards of coal ash slurry, will you choose a place called Sinking Creek? And I'll just make it a yes or no question. So anyway, they did. Underneath the Sinking Creek is the Carter's limestone. Okay, I showed a picture of Gallatin Steam Plant Cave, a big honking conduit that's not under the plant. It's right across the river, but it's in these same limestones. And if it looks like a sieve, that's because it is. Here's Gallatin Steam Plant Cave. I want to acknowledge Corey Holliday from Nature Conservancy who lent me that picture. So anyway, the short story is, as I have here, and I tell my students, do not read from slides. But I will in this case. So they started pumping this kind of wet slurry into Sinking Creek in 1970, and then as this report that came from Discovery, and I don't want to dwell on the legal parts, but because of the local geologic condition, leakage through the bottom of the area has been such that the sluice water did not reach the elevation of the spillway, even though the total plant sluice water had been routed to that area since the area was activated. Okay, well, what does that mean? Okay, so they're putting this stuff into essentially a big sinkhole. Okay, I very often in my classes use bathtubs for hydrologic analyses. Okay, so let's say this is this is obviously a bathtub. There's some water coming in. There's some water going out the drain. Okay, there's some water there. So if you study it for a little while and water's coming in, and the level doesn't change, well, what does that mean? Well, it's easy to see in a bathtub that what's going in must be equal to what's going out. Okay, if it's coming in faster than it's going out, the water will go up. Vice versa, it'll go back down. If it stays at the same level, then it must be leaking out at the same rate that it's going in. Okay, so this is what was happening at Sinking Creek. Okay, now I'm going to come back to 6,000 gallons per minute for 8.5 years. Okay. This was another little, the second week of my hydrology class. Well, 6,000 gallons per minute times 8.6 years is 27 billion gallons. Right? That's the minimum that they lost into Old Hickory Lake. Right? There was no way to even, sort of deny it. That was the data. Okay? I tried to figure out, how do we figure out what in the world is 27 billion gallons? How do we express this? So I thought, okay, well, the Bat Building in Nashville, that's in everyone's face. It's the biggest honking thing. I thought of the Titan Stadium, but there's one end is open, so it would leak out. I tried to find the volume of the Bat Building to figure out, is 27 billion gallons like 1/3 of that or 1/2 of that? I ended up calling the company that built the building, getting connected to the architect. And I said, this is why I want to find this out. Can you tell me the volume of your building? He said, sure. And he told me, it's 380 bat buildings is how much 27 billion gallons is. But still, what does that mean? Okay, it just means a lot, but that still doesn't really kind of help me grasp put my head around it. So I was coming with my wife back from the Smokies one time after this, and these things are always on my mind. And we're coming across the Clinch River on 40, and I turned to my wife and I said, you know, if you don't mind, get on the internet and tell me how much ash was lost at Kingston. So she gets on there and she says 1 billion gallons. Okay. So here's Exxon Valdez, Deepwater Horizon, huge spill in Martin County, Kentucky. Go back here. Here's Kingston. It blew them all away. 1 billion gallons. Okay. Well, it turns out that some simple math, 27 billion. Sorry, this is jumping around. Well, so there's Kingston. Okay, there's Kingston, there's Gallatin. That's 1 billion, that's 27 billion. It was hidden away. It was under Old Hickory Lake, okay, through the karst system, connected from the ash pond complex to Old Hickory Lake, okay. The good news is, leaving a lot of details, the SELC won the federal case. There was a federal and a state case starting in 2015. They won the federal case. They lost it. It was overturned at the Sixth Circuit on technical issues. The facts of the case were not disputed. And then in the end, the state case settled, and TVA has agreed to clean up the ash, to move it out of there, dry it, and then put it into line storage at the facility. In fact, at a 20 years at a cost of $640 million. So anyway, I'll kind of end with a beautiful picture again from Alan. This could be anywhere in Tennessee, and just a wonderful, wonderful part of a wonderful state. I'll end with the very satisfying words to me of Judge Waverly Crenshaw, who wrote the order, from the federal case. At the end of the 90-some pages, one of the last paragraphs said, and I have to wonder, why would anybody put a coal ash pond in a karst landscape next to a river? And again, if you're in my class, so that would be on the final. So thank you very much, Jim, for the opportunity, and just my pleasure. And I'll be happy to answer questions when we get to it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Appreciate it. Very informative. And it clearly points to the delicacy, the fragility of the karst areas in Tennessee and their susceptibility to pollution issues because they are so connected. So great. Thank you. All right. And then what I'd like to do then is introduce Dr. Brian Waldron of CAESER and the University of Memphis to talk about the unique hydrological features of West Tennessee and their issues in terms of pollution and contamination and why it's so important to be vigilant in those areas. So Brian, take it away. It's all yours. I'm going to stop my share and screen is yours.
Great. Thank you very much. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to have CAESER speak at this. I have my Associate Director of Education Outreach, Sarah Houston, that's been on board, and she's been instrumental in getting us connected. So we're happy to be participating and have other staff. And we have a number of students that are kind of in a huddle, but everyone's 6 feet apart, probably watching. So we're all glad to be participating. Thank you for inviting us. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully everybody can see this. As mentioned, I am with CAESER. It's an easy acronym for a long name, Center for Applied Earth Science and Engineering Research. We're multidisciplinary and working a lot with engineering, earth sciences, computer science, business. I'm going to be talking about the water resources in West Tennessee through the lens of CAESER, although there are a number of other agencies, both with TDEC, USGS, Conservancies, and other partners that also involved and witness the surface water, groundwater situation that we have. So this is part of the story. CAESER has 4 divisions. The one that we'll be kind of targeting today is what we do in the Water Resources Division. We do a lot. Being a university, we work a lot with students. That's our purpose, is to create the next workforce. So we have a lot of undergraduates and graduates. that we really get excited about getting them into the field, and they love it too, because books are great. That's how we all learn, but getting out in the field and testing it, that's where the fun is. So we'll kind of zoom out a bit. This is in the United States of America, in the southern states. The blue outline is what we call the Mississippi embayment, and underlies portions of 8 states, with the majority of coverage in Arkansas, Tennessee, and Mississippi. And when you look at it underneath, down to the bottom left, it forms a bowl-like trough that widens and deepens as it approaches the Gulf of Mexico. And ironically, its axis parallels that of the Mississippi River. So how did this come about? Way back, tens of millions of years ago, there was a called the Bermuda hotspot, a plume that, as the North American plate moved westward, that hotspot hit this Mississippi Valley fractured system. The Appalachian Mountains in Tennessee used to actually curve around and go to Texas, and water flowed to the north, not to the Gulf. So as this plume hit underneath these fractures, it caused land to raise up, and also, due to natural processes, also caused it to erode. So when this uplift moved off of the spot, as the North American plate kept trucking along, it subsided and allowed the sea to wash in multiple times, depositing layers of sand and clay. And at this point, the Appalachian Mountain piece had broken, and the Mississippi River flowed to the Gulf of Mexico. Well, the North American plate keeps moving along, and actually went through Carolina, where there's some earthquake faults, and then also now it's forming the islands in the Bermuda Triangle. That is why in West Tennessee we have so many left socks missing in all of our homes due to that relationship. So pretty interesting story of how our groundwater system came about through tectonic activity. I mentioned that it formed a bowl-like trough. These is what it looks like underground, exaggerated vertically. The sand aquifers in the sandy blue color are separated by layers of clay and gray. The clay does 2 things. It pressurizes the groundwater and also protects it from contamination. But as you look off to the right, and you see the recharge zone, the clay is absent. That's where the aquifer is replenished by rainfall. And there is no clay, so it's not under pressure and is more prone to contamination. Obviously, from the picture, you can see there are multiple aquifer systems. The primary one is called the Memphis Aquifer, and that's what a lot of states use, as well as the Mississippi River Valley Alluvial Aquifer, MRVA. So we always get the question, how much water do we have? And I didn't calculate it for West Tennessee, but did a static calculation for Shelby County, where Memphis is. And if y'all want to mentally take a guess as to how much water is beneath our feet in the Memphis Aquifer, you can kind of do that, and then I'll push the button. It'll give an approximation, so think about it. And that much, about 57.4 trillion gallons of water. That is a lot of water. And kind of like Chris, we're like, what does 57 trillion gallons mean? You know, how many bat buildings is that? So in Shelby County, we have the Clark Tower. It's 365 feet tall. And if we built a wall around Shelby County and took all the water out and flooded Shelby County, it would rise to the top of 351 feet. So if we did that, the top of the Clark Tower would be a very densely populated rooftop. But that is a lot of water flooding Shelby County. Needless to say, it's very prolific. We have a lot of water. But what are the issues that we're facing? Well, in our area, there are these multiple aquifer systems, and we have this replenishment by the rainfall. We have surface water interaction, and we have pumping from the aquifer. So what are some of the issues that we face? Well, one, are we going to run out of water? Are we using more than what's really going in by rainfall? That's a good question. Something Chris mentioned, you got a bathtub and, are you draining it out? Another one is, what about the relationship between our rivers and groundwater? The two are hydraulically connected. And there's both a quantity standpoint to that, but also a quality. And then we have this clay layer, and I mentioned it was present, but there are holes in it, naturally occurring holes, and that causes us some issues. We call these breaches. So these are some of the questions that we pose. We're going to recharge. Again, on the top, you see the diagram that we had before, and the recharge zone off to the right, that's where the sands come up. Now, dependence on the water availability is not just in Tennessee. If you look down to the bottom left, you'll see the states, and you'll see this blue swath. That is where the Memphis Aquifer comes up to the surface. There is no clay and is replenished by rainfall. If you look in the diagram to the top and you look at Merva to the left, the Memphis Aquifer does not come up to the top. It's buried. It's buried beneath the Mississippi River Valley Aquifer. And due to that, that tells us that the recharge in Tennessee is very important because it is actually exposed to the surface. So what we are doing here in Tennessee is not just about Tennessee, it's also about other states, our sister states around us. To help us, look at recharge, it comes in many flavors. One example is stream restoration work done by the West Tennessee River Basin Authority. They're focused on stream restoration, but they also realize that in what they do actually promotes recharge. And therefore there are these multiple examples, I'm not gonna go through all of them, that really help us in Tennessee look at ways we can get water back into the system. We do this at CAESER. We are investigating the recharge mechanisms to the Memphis Aquifer. We do this in a number of ways. And again, we use students for this. It is much more complicated how recharge gets into the groundwater than we had imagined. And there's a term that's not really researched at all, but it's called deep recharge, water that actually stays in the aquifer instead of discharging back into a stream. And your friends here are gravity and time. You need a lot of time, and we'll always have gravity, but that's what you need to get the water to get down into the aquifer. So what's really interesting is in the hills in Tennessee, West Tennessee, a raindrop is going to take about 100 years to get down to the water table. That's a long time. But you shimmy over to the gully off to the side and it'll happen seasonally. And that's just pretty remarkable, the difference in time of how water replenishes our drinking water supply. And what it does is it helps to inform elected officials and planners who look to develop areas as to which areas are more important to develop and which areas are needed for protection in order to get that recharge back into the system. This is just kind of the hills and valleys. We also are working in the farmland. This is Wes, who's a farm manager up in Milan, Tennessee with Mr. Schoaf. And they are working with us to look at recharge in agricultural fields and also how much water agriculture uses. And they're very happy to do so. This is through funding through the State of Tennessee Department of Agriculture. And when we look at recharge and we look at water usage, all of this is tying into the Tennessee State Water Plan. And this has been out for about, I think about 2 years, maybe a year and a half. And everything that is going on here and what I'm going to discuss is feeding into the Tennessee H2O water plan. So we also look at groundwater surface water interaction. the interaction with our rivers is very important, again, from a quality standpoint and a quantity standpoint. So we put a lot of instrumentation into the rivers and along the banks in order to understand how these two systems are exchanging water. A lot of our streams in West Tennessee are channelized, so they act a little differently than a natural stream, and that creates some challenges for us. So not only the small streams are important, but also the big. You know, we have the 5th largest river in the world forming our western boundary in Tennessee, the Mississippi River, and it too can contribute water to the groundwater system. So working with the Army Corps of Engineers, we use marine seismology, which is used to find oil and gas in the ocean. We're like, oh, let's drive up the river and see what we can see that way. So we did that, and we deploy equipment off the back of a buoy tender, and it sends energy down to the water, which is read with these pressure transducers, and we're able to see about a mile deep down to the basement rock. And the pink is the basement rock, and we can see faulting. Now, this is great for, you know, tectonic activity and what's going on with our area, but we can also see shallow. And this is the Mississippi River near Harbortown, Tennessee. The lineations, the horizontal ones, is the Mississippi River, and then you see the bed on the top. And you see this little pattern, maybe right here if you can see my mouse. I'm about to highlight it there. Looks like a feature like clay, the confining clay. But then there's also, whoops, missing pieces like that. And that's where there's a hole in the clay. That's how water can bypass that protective nature of the clay and get into our drinking water supply. In fact, the USGS have been finding some breaches in the Memphis Aquifer early on. That's what you see in some of them in pink. More have been highlighted or their shape altered by CAESER due to our investigations. That blue hatched area to the right is the recharge zone. That's where the clay becomes absent. So these are breaches. This is where clay is absent. Water can leak from the shallow to the deep. The next slide, you'll see some yellow dots show up. Those are production wells, about 200 of them, pulling water from the Memphis Aquifer. Next slide is where we have, contamination has been mapped by different releases. And that's what we face. And you can see the relationship of that. And this is why it's so important for us to understand where these breaches are. One way to map these breaches, but also the subsurface in West Tennessee, just to know where these units lie, is using geophysical techniques like seismic reflection. Now, we can get an idea of where some of these breaches may be through depressions in the water table, like a funnel, or maybe rivers that should be gaining or continuing losing, things like that. They only suggest a breach. Seismic reflection lets us actually see the breach by putting energy into the ground, and then we can map the middle picture features. Another way is age dating the groundwater. Our water, what happens is if there's a breach, water from the shallow system, which is more prone to contamination, not protected by clay, bypass the protective nature of the clay and get into our drinking water supply. The age of our groundwater in the Memphis Aquifer is around 2,000 to 3,000 years old. It gets older as you approach the Mississippi River. But when we see water, young water, less than 60 years old coming in, when we pull that out with a well, we're expecting 2,000 to 3,000 year old water, and we get water that's 11 years old. It's like, whoa, red flag. There's got to be a breach in the clay. So the system that we have is very complex. And in order to understand what's coming our way with regard to contamination, but also planning ahead for sustainability and water usage and availability, we need numerical models to do that. And these are computer models, and they are very helpful in answering some of our questions. So it's great that we do all of this work, and a lot of people do a great amount of work. And it wouldn't amount to much unless all of us got that data out to people that can actually understand it and can use it. So it needs to be actionable. And a lot of the agencies that I mentioned have their own outreach programs. So in education outreach, this is what Sarah Houston heads up at CAESER. We look at informing the public about what we're seeing, and we believe that it is important that citizens understand what's going on, not just the elected officials, not just the utility owners, but the citizens themselves. And therefore, we work very hard to host public meetings in order to convey research to them. There's Max.
That's perfect, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess the last slide is we also survey the citizens so we know what they know. So it helps us understand what we can do in order to inform them better. So that is all that I have.
All right, thank you, Brian. That was fascinating. And I wanted to just very quickly bring up a couple of other issues that we are following here so that we can lead into that topic of public participation here and leave some time for questions here. And by the way, I certainly will stay behind, and I think our two panelists will stay behind too to answer questions after 7 o'clock since we're getting so close. So one of the other issues that we're following this year is a bill to deregulate decentralized sewers, essentially neighborhood-sized septic systems. And if those are not properly constructed and designed, constructed, and operated, those can be a source of significant contamination, end up with E. coli and other bacterial contamination, create public health problems across the state, wherever these alternative sewer systems are installed. This is one poor woman in Tennessee, or excuse me, in Texas. She happened to have a cabin in the Gatlinburg area, and she encountered such problems with the septic system in her area that was not properly constructed, not properly designed. That her view was she'd rather stay in Texas than come into Tennessee. And given Texas's deregulatory problems these days, that's saying a lot. So another bill we're following this year is one that deals with mitigation. Mitigation is what you have to do when you disturb a water feature like a stream or a wetland or what have you. And this bill, SB 1049, is really a kind of a pin the tail on the donkey solution in search of a problem kind of legislation. Tennessee has real issues in finding, coming up with a workable mitigation system. And this one proposes to fine those who want to do mitigation if they don't do it quickly enough. That's never been the problem. The problem has always been that the prices for mitigation were not high enough to actually entice landowners to submit their property, allow their property to be used for mitigation. So the incentives on this are crazy. It will put mitigation in areas that where it's not as badly needed, that are not subject to the impacts that need the mitigation in the first place, and so it won't accomplish it. This is one that really needs to go to the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, or TASER, to study the problem and come up with a real workable solution to mitigation issues in the state. And we're obviously we stand ready to work with TDEC and other stakeholders to make that happen. So with that, what can you do? There's no substitute for getting involved, writing your legislator, your representative or state senator in this case, and we'll be talking with all of you more about that in coming weeks as the legislative session progresses. So with that, I want to stop talking and open up the floor to questions. We will stay behind after 7 o'clock and answer questions. So questions, anyone? You need to unmute yourself here. Angela, you're the mistress of
I don't understand most of the questions on here. There are some questions though.
okay.
A question about the coal ash, if it was still there, that had disappeared.
Yeah, well, it is the spring where, well, the springs, I guess, the places where it came out into the lake. And of course, Old Hickory Lake is the dammed up Cumberland River. And so because it's a lake there, it's very likely that you know, there's some amount of ashes settled in there. The design of Old Hickory Lake is different than some other lakes where the water kind of continually moves through. It's not, you know, it just kind of stagnant. Well, I mean, all rivers do, but it moves. So quite a bit of it's probably gone downstream. And so, but there hasn't really, as far as I'm aware, been any calculation of sort of how much is still in the lake and how much went downstream. I will note that downstream is right past Nashville's water intake, for whatever that's worth.
Will from the Nashville Tree Conservation Corps wants to know if there's efforts in the legislature to reduce wetland protections in Tennessee with reduced federal protection. Anybody?
That is something that we are looking at and hopeful that it doesn't come to pass. It's a little hard to predict exactly what's going to happen. And Tennessee has I won't say necessarily unique legislative system, but there is such a thing as a caption bill where you don't necessarily know what the legislation is about until it actually gets to committee hearing, which can be, you know, a number of weeks into the session. So we're monitoring the situation to see whether we have one of those little gremlins that might come back up.
Anyone else have any questions? I think I've tried to get all the ones that were on the chat, but unmute yourself and speak up if you have.
This is Dory, and wait a minute, I've got an echo effect going
We can
in
hear
my
you
head.
now.
Here we go. I'm Dory from the Harpeth Conservancy, and I recognize a lot of people on this call. Some of y'all I've worked with over the years. This is an incredible collection of experts. And I think one of the big challenges is that a lot of the developers and people who, you know, they know how valuable Tennessee is and how beautiful it is, but they don't really understand how complicated water is in Tennessee. So that's why it's so important that we figure out how to explain to folks that that waterfall or that little, the underground river is still part of our waterways. And so it doesn't just magically disappear and pop up somewhere else as an independent system, or that little wetland is still part of providing groundwater to the Memphis Sand Aquifer. So, you know, like we've had a deregulation of the CAESER in Tennessee. There are these pressures on our state agency, environmental agency, with some very decent regulations. And I think our challenges is trying to be able to explain to our state legislators with people who live in their districts that these areas that they care about matter, and to not be too, and to sort of ask and get the answers from our experts more about like, hey, how is this connected? I want to make sure that that waterfall or that spring or that cave stays clean. So I know there's some people from TDEC on here. I mean, they have to deal with this a lot. I don't know if they're comfortable speaking up, but I think our biggest challenges is trying to explain how valuable Tennessee is. And it's not that water moves like through a sponge. It's not a two-dimensional space. You know, it's all interconnected. And the more we can get that out there, and the more the legislators understand that, the better we all are. So anyway, if anybody has suggestions or stories that have worked, I think that's the big point of tonight, is getting it out there that whether you're in the Smokies or if you're in Memphis, it's the same challenge, which is getting that message communicated so that we don't have a very overly simplistic message that frankly the home builders are very good at doing.
Thank you, Dory. It's a great message.
Well, you know, being commissioner of the Department of Environment Conservation, I feel like Dory drew me out in a very subtle manner. Dory, you're awesome. Thank you. And I think Brian Pam still may be on. Brian, are you still on the call?
I am.
Okay, so I'll either let you lead or you can rescue me in the conversation. What would you? What's your preference?
I can lead off a little bit. Maybe you can talk about some additional
Sure.
efforts from leadership, if you don't mind.
No, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, we've definitely recognized the pressures from legislation and have, convened internally to discuss those challenges. We've also put together all of our minds and kind of created some messaging. We've created an ArcGIS story map that specifically talks about the differences in the definitions of waters of the U.S. versus waters of the state, highlighting a lot of those areas in Tennessee that are karst, the importance for the definition of waters of the state, and really talking about how unique our hydrogeology here is in Tennessee. I think that really gets to the point of the difference in the two definitions is that when the waters of the United States definition was being initially drafted, and some of the law behind it, there was recognition that there are different hydrogeologic conditions across the nation, and that there's not a one size fits all. And so we have, again, and I can put it in the chat here in a minute when I get a moment, but we've developed that story map to really tell that story, talk about the value of water resources throughout the state, how all the different citizens benefit from those waters, the interaction between surface water and groundwater in the state, and how important it is to protect that. So I'll put a link in the chat, and then Commissioner, if you want to talk a little bit more about efforts from leadership to send that message forward.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. And thank you so much, Brian. And I can assure you, I didn't know Brian was going to be on the call this evening. And Dr. Groves, I want you to know I grew up in West Kentucky, right there on the edge of karst. I had a sinkhole in next door on to my house. I had several caves and springs very close, and you might actually know of Lisenby's cave.
Yes, sure.
Yes, I have. I've been lost in that one. So yes, and
which county are you from?
Caldwell County,
Okay,
Princeton.
right,
Yes,
right.
yes, absolutely. So that's an extensive cave system. So,
Yeah.
but and I think that's in part, why I ended up where I am. God intervening and being very providential, and getting me to this place. But being a geologist and an engineer and a hydrogeologist, I would consider myself. So this has been a great discussion. And, and I just, when Dr. Waldron, really bragged on TNH2O and the work that was done over the past 3 years. And I know the Harpeth Rivers Conservancy was a big part of that. And what an awesome effort. And I really think the educational aspects of that are so critical. But the fact that we have nonprofits, I think Brian mentioned the story map. The Nature Conservancy has been a big part of that, and they put that out there. So I'm excited whenever I get to talk about recharge of the Memphis Sand Aquifer in West Tennessee and how these things work together, and Arkansas overdrawing, for rice production, things of that nature, and here we are, we're critical. We're a big part of that. So it's been a lot of fun for me, and we are going to stay engaged, but I think a big part of this is really the public education component. So So that's where I'm going to spend a lot of my time trying to communicate and convey those messages, because it's a lot of fun. And I have been to the head of Squatchy Valley, and seeing the spring come out the side of the hill right next to our visitor center at a part of the Justin P. Wilson Cumberland Trail State Park. So it is so neat, and I just want to commend you folks and Dory and Jim for hosting this event and get some excellent speakers. I mean, I just this has been a lot of fun for me, and I just thank you, and I've learned a lot.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Salyers. It's very much appreciated. Everyone has worked, and there's obviously a lifetime worth of information in each of these presentations that we received tonight to go through and understand. But the message that comes loud and clear is that our Tennessee waters are connected in ways that we don't all realize, and because they are so connected, we have to be very vigilant about making sure that we don't let those pathways of connection get contaminated. So, other questions, please.
Very quick comment.
For another few minutes. Don't want anybody to burn the midnight oil or to skip an adult beverage or anything like that. But we'll go for another few minutes. So please, somebody.
I could just make one comment. Commissioner Salyers, I appreciate your comments, and I was going to maybe wrap up by saying, since you're from Caldwell and you sort of kind of know that landscape, you'll very well understand. I get calls, from people to come out, look at sinkholes, some in their fields and whatever, and they're concerned. And I start with, this is what I call the price of living in paradise. So.
Understand. And I've played a number of golf courses up there that are, sinkholes are considered hazards, on the golf course. And I probably shouldn't have mentioned that, because we, sometimes we overuse nutrients to make the grass look green. But anyway, Dr. Grove, looking forward. Even though my undergraduate degree was Murray State University,
right.
I'll try my best to keep it cordial with you.
I love it.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, comments, anyone? Please don't be bashful.
Thank you all for joining us. Again, we will email the presentations out along with a survey we'd love for you to complete. Give us some more ideas on what you'd like us to converse about next time. We do have some other programs coming up. We'll make sure that you're aware of those as well. And we will include the email addresses of our panelists so you can ask them questions if you're just being a little shy tonight.
Great, and thank you so much again to Dr. Groves and Dr. Waldron. Great discussion, great presentations. So thank you much, everyone, and we hope to see you at next month's conservation conversation. So
thank you so much.
Thanks,
thank
Jim.
you. Okay. Thank you, David.
Everybody.
Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.